All right, everybody, welcome back. Here we are in Galilee, Rhode Island again. Fishing boat going by. That's going into the port of Galilee, coming back from a fishing trip. Real fishing port here. It's really beautiful. It's not super precious either, if you know what I mean by that. It's like these are where people actually make their living, connected to the sea. It's a beautiful place, and we're in Galilee on this side of the the water here. It's a little entryway. I think they call it a causeway coming in from the ocean. And on the other side there, those buildings you're looking at are built in Jerusalem, Rhode Island. So we've shared that before. I won't say that every time. But for this series, the second lesson of the Way of the Heart, which is the Way of the Heart, is the first of 3 books in the Christ Mind trilogy, which are the main core sort of formal teachings of the Way of Mastery. Way of Mastery has a whole lot more material than just that. There are 5 core texts, of which these are 3. Way of the Heart is the first of the 3 core texts, as they call them. 5 core texts. Actually, the first one was the Joshua Letters, which was an autobiographical account of the Channel JM and his encounter with Jesus. And then a book called The Way of the Servant, which comes next, but is a very esoteric book. And it really kind of is describing the final stage of awakening. It's a fascinating one. And then after that, these 3 teachings were given 1 year at a time. So we're just at the very beginning of the formal teachings on the second lesson. And this is, I think, our third. I should know that. It's our third of what will probably be 5 or 6 discussions. We go in, I'm reading the text of reading the actual lessons, and then just as a student, I've been with these things for over 25 years, just sharing a little sort of my own discoveries, doubts, all these things along the way, just as a fellow student, sort of hopefully giving a little bit of perspective or history, just from one student's experience. We're all equal in this, of course. But sometimes if somebody spent, a quarter of a century, so hopefully they found something out. Hopefully they've learned something. So anyhow, reading from the text, and as hopefully following along, I think really somebody was asking me the other day, well, what's the best way to follow along to the audio? And the best way to follow along to the audio is to have a copy of the book. So the book, The Way of the Heart, and we are on lesson 2, and I will be reading from the text. The only failure that occurs within your own consciousness, when you believe that it is not acceptable to receive and own and embrace your creation with love and with innocence. I'm going to read that again because I'm not sure I read that correctly. So we're starting in a paragraph. So he's saying the only failure occurs within your consciousness when you believe that it is not acceptable to receive and own and embrace your creation with love and innocence, even if the creation isn't one that you might think is a positive. Maybe the bread that you were cooking didn't rise and ended up being a mess. But so continuing from the text, quote, to look upon it, to experience it, to recognize your perfect safety in doing so, from where you can decide whether to continue in that form of creation or whether to think differently, to approach things differently. That is where the catch is that part of the mind began to teach you a long, long time ago what to accept as acceptable creations and what not, what to take responsibility for and what to deny responsibility for. And that conflict creates the illusion of separation. And when taken to its extreme, one discovers what you call your hospitals, full of those in deep depression, paranoia, and feeling within the beingness, within the human mind, of feeling alienated and alone. Helplessness, hopelessness, despair, anger, hatred. All of these are symptoms of a fundamental delusion that has occurred within the depth of the mind. It has occurred because there has been a long history of having cultivated the skill of listening to the wrong voice. The wrong voices of the ego, it has taught you to judge, to pick, to select what you'll be responsible for. The more you move into that consciousness, the harder it seems to ever hope for a chance of transcending the sense of separation and conflict and lack of peace. End of paragraph. Joshua starts revealing the origin of the dream of separation here. But in this paragraph, he shares something which will become incredibly important in the student's relationship with the Way of Mastery, and starts really defining in a new way the dream of separation, how it was created, the meaning of it, the implications of it, and our relationship with it in a much more comprehensively loving way than I'd ever heard it explained. So the key sentence here is, there has been a long history of having cultivated is a very important word here, the skill of listening to the wrong voice. So he's calling listening to the wrong voice a skill that we have cultivated. That will come back in a very important way. Okay, on to the paragraph. Next paragraph. For how many of you have not known the feeling of resting your head upon the pillow at night and not being able to sleep because it's just not going the way you expected? The reason you cannot sleep is because you are in judgment of your creation. But it is possible to cultivate just the opposite, in which you learn to look with perfect innocence upon all things or that arise in the field that is your experience. To look with innocence and what is called wonder at every feeling, from the place of curiosity, as you would look upon a cloud that passes through the sky. Look at it and marvel at it, its shape, its color. Well, where did that one come from? And to embrace it, knowing that it does not affect the purity of the sky through which it temporarily floats by. And each of your creations is exactly like this. It arises in the field of time and space. You experience it, and then it fades away. Every hurt that you have ever known is like a cloud that began to pass into your field of awareness because you were perceiving things in a certain way. And if that hurt is still lodged within you, it is because you latched onto it. You follow the voice of ego, which caused you to believe that you are identified with that feeling, with that perception. And because that's you, if you let it go, what's going to happen? You might disappear. You might die. And the human mind, then, is that field within creation, within consciousness, that has learned to become so identified with perceptions and experiences and feelings that are not necessarily comfortable, it believes that if it lets go of them, it will die. And so from our perspective, as we would look upon your energy fields, those of you who are still identified with this dimension, it looks as though you are gripping, causing to condense energy, and your knuckles are white, trying to hold on to limitation and guilt, to unworthiness and doubt. And a paragraph. So much is being revealed in Joshua's description of reality in these first two lessons. Again, he says in the first lesson, we generate our experience based on what we freely choose to put our experience upon. Then here, cultivating the skill of listening to the wrong voice. The reason you cannot sleep is because you are in judgment of your creation. And so here we go, the big J word. And I'm not talking Joshua or Jesus, the big J word in this case, judgment. Judgment which creates separation. Judgment which creates the perception of conflict, of immorality, of all of these things, which can be applied in any way to almost any situation. An alternative to this is it's possible to cultivate just the opposite, in which you look with innocence and curiosity about all things going by. And this is very important, and we start jumping into this space quite early in the teachings. We transition from one who's reacting to what's going on to one who's observing what's going on. What Joshua was talking about here is it's possible to cultivate the opposite, in which you learn to look with perfect innocence upon all things. So you're looking, you're being the observer, you're starting to identify yourself as the observer, and that's a huge transition. That's what so much of the teachings are about. This transition from reactor, the ego would say you're compelled to respond in certain ways. Well, that's not really true, that we always retain the freedom to choose to observe what's occurring, even if it's just a feeling state or a thought about an event, and ideally to cultivate the opposite of judgment, which is looking with wonder and innocence at everything that's occurring, everything passing through the field of your mind, and ask questions that you could say only the observer could ask, like, I wonder if that's, where did that one come from? That's interesting. And there are many other questions observers can ask. Is it true? Is it, I wonder what the next thought will be, without attaching and identifying with them. So the human mind is that field within creation that's learned to become so identified with these uncomfortable perceptions that it thinks if it lets go of them, it will die. So here we are stuck between these uncomfortable perceptions and the uncomfortable belief in death. And so the human mind's knuckles are white, trying to hold on to limitation and guilt, to unworthiness and doubt. And here we are in the dream of separation, beautifully defined. And the beauty is the teachings also create a roadmap out. Back to the text. You would indeed seek innocence and peace. You would seek abundance and prosperity and joy. But often when you touch these things, it frightens you. And why? Because the truth of the kingdom requires openness, trust, expansiveness, spaciousness. It involves allowing, trusting, witnessing, letting things come and go, learning to create a deep enjoyment of whatever arises, seeing that all things are just modifications of consciousness itself, and then letting them go when it's time for them to do so. And rest assured, there is no one, not a single soul, that has ever discovered something that was birthed in time that did not also end in time. So a strong recommendation to not attach too fully to something that is birthed in time, because it will end in time. Back to the text. And how much of your suffering comes because you are clinging to a lifeless past and insisting that you carry it with you still. And you are doing that because in the past you became identified with the clouds that were passing by, claiming them as your own identity. And therefore, if you release it, it will mean that you must change and must go on. And creation itself that flows from the mind of God is an ongoingness forever. You will never cease to be. You will go on forever and ever and forever and forever and forever and forever. You will go on forever exactly as you are now, or you can allow the mind of God to flow through you, carrying you to an ever greater expansiveness, deepening your awareness of the infinite loveliness of the power of the mind of God. This year, then, we do indeed embark on the way of the heart. And though many clues have been given, we will come this year to refine those clues, to create what you might think of as a system or a pathway upon which you can walk, to deliberately cultivate the quality of awareness and consciousness necessary to stabilize that awareness, so that you can bring it to each and every moment of your experience. Imagine then being able to experience whatever arises without losing the sense of spaciousness and innocence and ease that you now experience in fleeting moments. For instance, you know the experience when things are going well outside around you and you're singing a happy tune and life seems to be moving ahead. Imagine that same quality of trust and of faith and of certainty of purpose even when the buildings are crumbling around you and the bank account has gone dry. Being able to look at those events with the same sense of innocence and wonder with which you would look into the eyes of your beloved. For you see, such a quality of awareness is perfect mastery. Within it is discovered perfect peace and perfect freedom, perfect joy and uninterrupted communion with all of creation. And if you would well receive it, that quality of feeling intimately one with all of creation is what you have been seeking as a soul since first the identification with a creation called ego began. For that creation, again, created conflict and separation. And everything you have ever attempted to do since has been an attempt to overcome separation, to gain back what you felt you had lost. It's just that the ways you have sought to do it don't work. The eye of the needle that separates you and your consciousness from the world of conflict and fear and guilt and unworthiness, that world and the world of the truth of the kingdom lie side by side within your own mind. And the eye of the needle that one must pass through is the recultivation of the innocence of a child, and is for this reason I often taught, become again as a little child to enter the kingdom. And the cultivation of the way of the heart is that pathway whereby you deliberately, consciously choose to become again as an innocent child, as you were in the beginning, before you ever created and then incarnated into this dimension of experience that seems to be so permeated by a sense of conflict and separation. And a paragraph. So imagining a state, he describes this state, in which we are consciously experiencing spaciousness, innocence, and ease, no matter what's happening in the events of the world around us. He certainly speaks from loving experience when he talks about maintaining a state of peace and love, even when things were crumbling around. One of the many lessons of the crucifixion, his willingness and capacity to walk towards it freely, and even in the midst of this experience, which you can see how that would threaten pretty much everything that one might think was valuable or had meaning in their lives, to see not only the impact on his own life, but the impact on his community, but to trust with wonder and innocence all arising things. Again, if we attach to and identify with the things of space and time too much, to enjoy them and to be with them and experience them fully, yes, but to act as if they are and define what we are, these are temporary things. Joshua gave up the body freely and gave up identification with the body freely in doing so, and led the way for us to see beyond this idea that we die when the body dies, that death isn't real, is one of the main messages of the crucifixion. To become again as a little child, to enter the kingdom, to become again as you were in the beginning, he says, before you ever created and then incarnated into this dimension of experience that seems to be so permeated by a sense of conflict and separation. Back to the text. So it begins there. And I would ask you now to begin to put this into practice. So where you happen to be, whether you are viewing this with your eyes on what you would call your video or whether you are listening to the words, stop just for a moment and truly become aware of where you are. And where are you? Are you not having the experience of seemingly being within a body? Don't you seem to be abiding in a room somewhere or an environment? Aren't you within an environment in which there are certain weather patterns going on around you? Perhaps there are other sounds coming into your ears. Can you truly be aware of where you are now? Can you feel the weight of the body as you stand upon your feet or sit within your chairs? Do you notice the tension in your neck? Do you notice the racing of the mind if that is going on? Can you begin to bring awareness to exactly what is from a place of innocence and non-judgment? You have a saying in your world, it is what it is, and that is the beginning of wisdom. You will, of course, discover that what is what you have chosen to make of it. Be therefore where you are now and deliberately decide to accept wholly that what you are experiencing in this very moment has no cause whatsoever except your choice to experience it. Rest assured, whatever the mind may try to say, if you did not wholly want to be right where you are, you wouldn't be there. And if you are in a body in the field of space and time, rest assured, if you desired it, you chose it, and it's here. Begin here. There is no need to judge it, no need to ask it to be different. Just truly be aware of what is. If you are feeling the body sitting in a chair, can you allow the thought to come into the mind? I have literally created this experience. Something within me is so grand, so powerful, so vast, so beyond anything that scientists have ever come up with, that I have literally crystallized in the field of experience awareness of being a body in space and time. It has come forth from the field of my consciousness, the gift to me of God, who asks only that I learn to create as God creates. I've said many times that the Father looks upon you and says, "This is my only creation, and it is very good." For the Father marvels at what you are, knowing perfectly well that what you are emerged out of her holy mind. End of paragraph. I notice here we are, really the first exercise that he's asking us to engage in. Deliberately deciding to accept wholly that what you are experiencing in this very moment has no cause whatsoever except for your choice to experience it. That exercise, this awareness, if you feel it, if you deliberately decide, you might feel some agitation or disturbance within the self. Can you see that if you're identified with an ego, which is saying you're a victim, which is saying, hey, there's outside forces, you're at the victim of the world, the ego's consciousness and theology, if you want to put it that way, is very different from the first axioms. So here, this confrontation between ourselves and where we are, perhaps identified with ego mind, and deliberate decision now. We're being asked to make a deliberately decide. Be there for where you are. Puts you where you makes you realize, hey, you're exactly where you are, and deliberately decide to accept wholly that what you are experiencing, where you are in the body, in this world, in this time, everything, wearing the jacket you're wearing, everything, has no cause whatsoever except your choice to experience it. Then the next sentence, rest assured, whatever the mind might try to say, very important sentence, whatever the mind might try to say, if you did not wholly want to be right where you are, you wouldn't be here. So the thing I want to point out here, which is always interesting to me, in the many years that I've been doing this work, one of the most absolutely unarguable miracles, if you want to put it, that occurs with regularity and predictable regularity, is that whenever we start doing this kind of work, this self-awareness work, owning the truth that we are creating our experience according to the teachings, not being the victim of it, as the ego would say, when the conflict between these things starts arising in ourselves, something will happen in the world. The world around us. It's proof that what's happening is what's being said in these texts. And there will be agitation, there will be distraction. Ego seeks to get away from these truths. What happened, I just noticed as I was reading, I noticed that this group of people stopped in front of the camera and started chatting. Well, that hasn't happened, the whole time we've been doing these videos and with this little boardwalk going by in Galilee and Jerusalem, and made some noise enough so that I even noticed in my own mind that, I'm noticing myself getting distracted. So that the universe brings you exactly what you're desiring, which at that time is distraction from hearing these truths or these ideas. These ideas activate our ego in a way that it's like what they call pressing buttons. One thing we learn in the teachings is that whenever our buttons are pressed, whenever we get agitated, annoyed, angry, sad, afraid, it's a blessing, because what we're trying to do is walk through what could be called a minefield. The minefield are all the unloving thoughts, all the minds underground, or all the things that we've allowed to live in our mind, M-I-N-D. But when we find one, and to dig them up and diffuse them, basically, to make it so all of our reactions are loving instead of all these big explosions. So whenever a button is pressed, whenever we get agitated, we might notice the desire to fall asleep. We might want to change the subject. We might start judging the other person. We can just notice agitation and disturbance, and they will occur. Just wanted to point out, the dog started barking at the same time, I think, that we just wanted to point out that this will almost always happen. And it will happen internally, and almost always happen something outside, which is a miraculous. There'll be something which gives you the opportunity to be distracted. The alarm will go off, or somebody will enter the room, or something will happen. And they're given the opportunity to say, right, okay, disturbance, I'm feeling disturbed, I'm feeling disoriented. Some of my sacred cows are being threatened here, but you can see the sacred cows of ego mind are not loving and holy things. So it's a conviction and a desire to transform. Just a simple example, when you want to lose weight, there's a certain discomfort at not eating what you're used to eating. The habits change. So just be noticing that if this discomfort arises, it's not a sign that you're doing the wrong thing a lot of the time. A lot of the time, it's a sign you're doing the right thing. And we become happier learners as we learn. It says, oh, wow, like I'm feeling disturbed. Oh, wow, I must be on the right track. Another example is if you're learning, say, to speak in public. Most people feel funny speaking in public. But when you're walking up to that podium to speak in public for the first time, it's scary. But you're breaking through into a new world. So if you can get through that fear, if you can breathe and stay present as that disturbance occurs, acknowledge the feeling, breathe, welcome it, and say, yeah, I'm gonna go to the podium. I'm gonna learn to speak in public, so that I walk into a new world in which I've done that. I feel comfortable doing that, a new mastery. A lot of these things, these stages, deliberate choice to acknowledge that where I am is exactly what I've chosen. I've chosen it. Wow, may not be what you're thinking. The situation with the bank, how much money you've got, the situation with the body and how it's doing, and aging and relationships, all these things. Wow, what if it were true? Wow, what if it were true that we're the ones actually creating it? Oh my God, we have to take responsibility for that? Like, wow, I don't know about that. But it means that we're free and that we're loved. So these ideas are really worth considering. They're the beautiful core of the Way of Mastery teachings, the teachings of Christ mind. Thank you for listening. It's a beautiful day here in Galilee and Jerusalem. Wishing everyone well. This is David Chalk. Thanks. Bye for now.